Hello. I'm going to be reading a story off of a public story site called Quotev, and the story that I'm going to be reading to you all is called Hear the People Sing, and was written and published by the author Koroneko. So, from what the description of the story says, this is a fan fiction of the well-beloved video game franchise Halo, with the most infamous and iconic fictional character who never takes off his helmet, Master Chief, and is also joined with his trusty artificial intelligence companion, Cortana. And this is a fan fiction I'm going to be reading because I find the story, as far as I had read it, to be really interesting. Now, as the author has said, this story is going to be a fan fiction with a modern spin to the Halo IP. Don't know if I used that correctly. Oh well, but the story in general was going to be following the main character, who the author has stated was going to be taking after themselves in description, and how the character's life is going to be basically uprooted into chaos and havoc, and that they would soon be forced to learn how to survive in what sounds like a dystopian apocalypse world. Ooh, sounds like a great time. But that's just me. Yeah. So, without further ado, let us get into the Halo fanfiction story, Hear the People Sing, by Koroneko. Oh, and if people are interested in reading ahead like an overly eager achiever, then I shall leave the link to the Quotev story in the description. Or if you're someone who doesn't like pressing links to things without trust, which I totally get and support with the caution 100%, I very much respect it, then I will shout out the author and story once again so that you may go and find them by search. So, the site, once again, is called Quotev, spelled Quotev, where you can find a whole assortment of stories and even fun quizzes to do to pass the time, all created by definitely creative and imaginative people. My kind of people, not gonna lie. But the author is, once again, Koroneko, spelled just as you see here. Capital K, lowercase uro, capital N, then a 3, lowercase k, and then finally an ordinary O. Jesus, that was... Just explaining that was way too complicated than it needed to be. So, just forget my garble and look at the description for the less than confusing information. And the story, again, is Hear the People Sing, by Koroneko. Must be a fan of La Miserable, maybe. Huh? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm done now. I gotta go. Okay, on with the story. And yes, I'm going to be doing some voice work for this reading experience. Only natural that I do, along with some art too. Okay, bye. Deep within the dark and expansive forest, lights flickered and flashed all around the perimeter of a large solitary government building. Along with the flashing lights, there was also a blaring wail of a siren piercing the previously still and cool night air. But it wouldn't remain cool for long, as there were several raging fires that lit up the dark overcast sky brightly in a sickly, ominous hellfire red. They burned in several different parts of the facility, with no indication of there being a group of people fighting the fires and adding relief to the unforeseen permutation. In fact, most of the people on site were more so focused on loading up separate large military-type vehicles and trucks with an array of things, ranging from boxes full of folders and documents, other foreign objects, and lastly, many weapons. But all while they ran around busying themselves with their imperative task, one individual was standing inside a burning laboratory section of the facility and seemed to be stood in a dazed focus. As he continued to ponder inside the evacuated and dim laboratory, that was flashing a bright, vivid cautionary red, which was also slowly beginning to fill up with the dark, suffocating smoke, a figure dressed in a white lab coat raced down the hallway outside the lab, but faltered in their sprint when they caught sight of the darkly dressed man standing listlessly with their back to the unbreakable glass window. The scientist instantly recognized the out-of-place individual and rushed into the lab. She nearly dropped her keycard in her rush to unlock the door, but once she did, the metal door slid open with a loud beep, and several millions of glass shards crinkled under her flats as she ran inside and towards the man. "Sir, you shouldn't be here! The building's burning down! You have to evacuate!" she began urgently, but stopped a little bit behind him, not daring to reach out. "What happened to the experiments?" "I'm sorry?" She blinked owlishly at the man in confusion. not understanding what he was talking about, or why he would be worried about that instead of dying from the smoke and possible chemical fume inhalation. The experiments. Do we have at least one success? She bit her lip, hesitating for a moment to share their unfortunate findings, but knew she had to provide an answer soon rather than lie. There wasn't enough time to allow for a complete understanding of the results and side effects of the experiments. However, from the most we could gather in data, most of the subjects were either dead or dying from the tested injections, so it's safe to assume. She paused, panicked as a light fixture far across the lab suddenly burst and collapsed to the ground in bright sparks. Then she hurriedly continued in a rush to hurry this conversation to a close, so that they could both exit the premises safely. It's safe to assume there's no viable subject capable of withstanding the experiment and its effects. There was a long pause, as the lab continued to fall apart around them. Then she refocused her wide eyes back onto the man, who had then let out a sullen sigh. A waste of time. A waste of money. People are so weak. She was slightly trembling in fear, but flinched with a terrified cry when the panels of the ceiling next to her collapsed in even more bright electrical sparks. "Sir, we really have to." "Is there really no good news?" "Sir." She turned in surprise when she saw another fellow scientist racing into the lab. The metal door beeping open loudly before sliding back closed with a clunk. "Oh, what is it? Make it quick. And if it ends up being more failures..." The suited man turned and leered his sharp blue eyes at the newcomer, but the other scientist remained unfazed, urgently answering, "Sir, they're here. The project worked successfully." At his words, the dark-suited man could only stare at him in silent shock, to which she had shared as well. It worked? It actually worked? It worked. He laughed in disbelief. Then she met her unsure eyes with the other scientist before the man turned and combed his hand through his dark hair, staring up at the ceiling, or beyond it, at nothing in particular. His shoulders sagged in visible disbelief. Then, after taking a few more seconds to compose himself, he cleared his throat and turned back to the two of them. "Well, I suppose now's a good time as any to leave this shithole, don't you?" And just like that, he began leisurely striding back to the door to finally leave the burning laboratory and collapsed building. But just as the two began to follow after him, the woman was caught off guard when he turned back to her. She practically felt the breath escape her lungs when he planted one hand onto her chest and simply pushed her away. She was filled with confused terror, and barely kept from falling backwards onto the broken glass littering the whole floor. He met her wide eyes with a placid and apathetic one, and simply said, "Your work is no longer needed here. I'd say you might want to clean out your area and leave, but..." He looked around at the decimated laboratory for effect, and she stared gawking at him in shock and disbelief. She remained where she stood, still reeling from the words he had just said to her. He left with just as much nonchalance as he had spoke, and the other scientist could only purse his lips and send her a remorseful look before rushing after the finely suited man. The door slid to one last close before being locked, and she could only continue to stand in the lab where she was, understanding the implication behind his words and what would undoubtedly await her outside if she really did leave. There was no hope for her, she knew, but unbeknownst to her, there was a figure crouched behind a metal lab table, and he had remained behind there for the whole conversation. Chapter 1. A crisp, cool breeze filtered through the brightly lit city, which was alive with the lights of cars zooming about in the streets below the balcony that a single girl perched upon. She wore a dark denim hoodie that encased her small frame and protected her from the ever-present wind that circled around in a vain attempt to reach her skin and chill her to her core. However, no such thing happened, and she felt as though she could laugh at the effort the element put into trying to push her around. She wasn't one to dwell upon bad faith, especially if it were from her external world. Some would call her strange for personifying such a natural and inhuman prospect of life, to give it a personality just as plain as most anyone she'd meet. but she found it easier to understand whatever obstacle that presented itself with the name and character in order for her life to bear a bit more enthusiasm. Call her idealistic, but at least she wasn't boring, and her family would more than likely second that notion. Wow, I forgot how pretty the city could look in person. Her sister hummed from behind her, leaving the room and closing the sliding glass door behind her so that the cold would be locked out along with them. The girl faced back towards the city skyline again, before murmuring back in a quiet tone of her own. Yeah, but... I trailed off, then looked morosely up into the sky, which was overtaken by dark gray clouds that were painted hues of dim yellow from the city lights below. What? My sister asked, knowing well when something was eating away at me. Whether I hid it from her or not, we, along with our brother, had that strange sibling connection where they can feel and just know things never explicitly shown before others. It's been a blessing even being related to them, really. I can't see the stars, slumping over the railing with a pout. My sister could only chuckle at my behavior for something she deemed so trivial. Never mind. We're in the city. Most lights from the buildings would most likely snuff out the starlit sky. What, were you expecting to see your aliens again? My sister teased, her narrow green eyes peering down at me through her dirty blonde tresses and glinting with amusement. No. Maybe. I don't know. But I learned I can't survive in a city environment without being able to see the stars. I scowled back at her, still folding over the balcony railing like a rag doll. Not enough to tumble over, though. Well, we're only going to be spending a couple days here anyway. Maybe you'll get lucky and catch a few stars peeking out at some point during our stay here, she replied to my griping, leaning on the balcony railing with me and seeing the city with her own earthly-rooted eyes. Hopefully, I responded back, slightly envying the way she never let what happened in the sky or anywhere she couldn't realistically see affect her in the now and the future. We were close siblings, but were too different to understand each other's preferences or thought process. It was no wonder she was definitely heralded as the one going to be going places. Come on, let's go inside and finish our pancakes, my sister urged, pushing herself up and turning towards the sliding door. Yeah! I pushed myself up as well and moved to follow her, but paused when the wind spurred up again, this time messing with my own dark tresses and flinging it into my eyes. Instinctively, I tossed my head against the wind and faced the direction it was blowing, which made my hair flutter on either side of my head behind me and left the only thing that affected my eyesight, the cold buffeting wind. Once it died down, I was facing the wide and bright city again. My eyes traveled over everything I could see, but I didn't really know what else I was expecting to see. Apart from the lit-up clouds, the dark looming buildings with sickly yellow-lit windows, and the motions of distant ant-like vehicles driving only towards their destinations, there was nothing of special interest to note. Em, are you coming? My sister's voice pulled me back to reality, and I turned back to refocus on her again. Yeah, I am. And with that, she entered in first as I began to follow. With one last look behind me at the city, I turned around and stepped through the door frame and locked the balcony door behind me. I was immediately met with warmth and solace from the high-altitude wind berating around outside. The room my family and I currently were staying in was just the run-of-the-mill nice modern hotel room, with 2 large king-size beds making up a majority of the space, a large TV perched on a dark cabinet in front of the beds, a wide, fancy marble bathroom with polished everything, and, of course, the balcony I just came from. My father was doing something on his phone while my brother was eating his own pancakes by the desk in the corner of the room that was full of foam food containers of leftovers we took from the diner, which we stopped at for lunch earlier upon first arriving to the city. I didn't know where my mother was, probably in the bathroom to get ready for bed before my siblings could hoard it for a while, but I looked at the TV that was on in interest. The channel it was switched to was a news channel, one of the select few channels that the hotel even allowed to be an option, and the news anchor was covering a news story that had taken the whole world by storm for its shock value and absolute maddening example of some select few human beings sparking a fire with the whole blaze following after. Grave desecrations, in massive quantities, and in such little time, too. No one really knew how or why it happened, but destroying the monuments and tombstones of those who were passed on and in need of rest suddenly became a rapid and infamous trend to the most heart-wrenching degree. There was only one word to describe the sorry fucks who were taking out whatever emotions of negativity they themselves were harboring out on the dead. Disrespectful bastards that deserved whatever was coming to them. Okay, that was more than one, but still. Whatever the karma that was due to come to them was, I really did hope it would be big enough to shake whatever arrogant and selfish little bubble they always took comfort in from the harsh reality everyone around me, the normal people and hard-working individuals of life, had to face off against on a daily basis. To the grass they absolutely refused to touch. But in my own mother's words, karma couldn't come soon enough. I looked at my father, who had seemed the most impacted by this worldly issue taking center stage. He was also the reason we were here in the first place, despite him normally being less impassioned to partake in social and worldly issues, while me and the rest of the family talked and denoted the happenings that negatively affected any decent societal morals. His personal friend had fallen victim to having a loved one's grave vandalized by faceless cowards, and my father and his friend decided to join in on one of the many first protests and community gatherings to protect the certain cemeteries that were still standing and untouched by ill-intentioned groups. Those of whom my father believes are young adults who were never taught right and disciplined for wrong. For this particular cemetery, there were also a majority of them housing fallen soldiers, and so me, my family, and many other well-intentioned people were determined to keep watch over the cemeteries for as long as they had to, in order for the strange trend of grave desecrations to finally blow over. And tonight, my father said that there were probably some people at the cemetery already standing vigil over all of the grave sites. Once again, the best of humanity is brought out to stand firm against the forces of evil, such evil only being caused by such humans. I'm so proud. But my family isn't standing vigil that night, as we had just arrived in the late afternoon and were quite tired from the long drive we endured. Not to mention the traffic, but we would definitely be going to the cemetery tomorrow. There was to be a festival type of gathering for the people that were determined to protest the worldwide phenomenon, but we would also be in high spirits doing so. I just couldn't wait for it. As me and my sister settled down on one of the large beds to eat our food, I know the sheets are clean, but there's no room at the desk. Another news story popped up, and the news anchor was just introducing the topic that also appeared around the same time the desecrations began. But my father switched the channel to an adult show that was South Park. The story was supposed to be a gossip conspiracy that set all the internet ablaze with awe and disbelief, especially for some video gamers. But we didn't really bother to pay any mind to it. After all, there was no way a video game could actually be real, if that was truly what the conspiracy theory was about. No super soldier from outer space would appear into our reality from a freaking video game to help endanger humanity. That just never happened. Okay, so that was the reading for the prologue and the first chapter for Hear the People Sing, a story by Kuroneko on Quotev. So if you liked the video I made, the read and the art accompaniment, so definitely like and subscribe. If you, only if you liked it, I'd really appreciate it though, so thank you. And, if that were the case, then I would definitely want to read a lot more. Probably not do, like, two chapters in, like, a freaking single episode, because I don't know how I'm editing this, and it's a lot of work, but it was fun, so, yeah. Anyways, thank you, and I'll see you in the next video, which I'm definitely gonna do, because I like the story a lot, so, yeah, bye!